So, I've been playing that new Godzilla game here. Playing it as we speak. It's paused right now. But, like, I've been playing that new Godzilla game. Just came out on PS3 and PS4, and it's really fucking good. I'm really enjoying it. Like, I pretty much spent all day yesterday just playing it endlessly, and I pretty much unlocked all the things. I unlocked all the monsters, including Jet Jaguar. I did a video about that and all that stuff. And like, it's really great. I really like it because I'm a Godzilla fan. I feel like if you're not already in the Godzilla fan club, I don't know, but fuck those people. They're wrong. That was a poor life decision on their part to decide to not be a fan of Godzilla. They need to rethink. They need to rethink that critical life choice that led them to this and I feel like if they re-examine why they've done this to themselves, they might find themselves a lot happier and a lot less miserable if they like flip that switch and like fix that mistake in their life. Anyway, it's so great. Like it's fun. Like because the stream I did, I was like, those weren't really my first impressions because I played the demo on the Japanese PSN on the PS3 like last year. So like I kind of knew what I was getting in for, but like as I was playing, my thoughts weren't like the most coherent because it was the kind of stream of consciousness. But like now, like I've had time with it, I can kind of put my thoughts together a little bit more. And like the biggest hurdle I can see people having is the control scheme because it is kind of weird. It is a little unorthodox where like it's sort of like tank controls, but not really. Like I can see people playing it and being like, "What? Like you gotta press the shoulder buttons to turn Godzilla left and right?" I don't really have an explanation for that one. That was kind of weird. But like I do like how Godzilla's all slow and lumbering, like he's just this big fucking piece of shit, just like trudging along. Like, if you watch footage of the old Godzilla fighting games, like Destroy All Monsters, Melee, and Save the Earth, and Unleashed, like they move fucking fat. Like that shit's like on fast forward. It's fucking insane. Like look up footage of Godzilla Unleashed on the PS2 or something. That shit is unreal. How fast they fucking move in that game. Like it makes me think of when they did Pacific Rim. Guillermo del Toro was like, these things can't move like they're fucking anime super flippy flip flap jumping around boop boop bow. Like they're like skyscraper size 200 feet tall fucking giant robots. They have to move like it. They have to act like it, or else that suspension of disbelief in the audience's brain is gonna be like, what the fuck? Like they're so massive and lumbering, and like every step they take takes like a fucking half a minute, and the winding up for their punches is like, and the reaction time to try and dodge shit super slow. That's what it feels like playing the game. Where like you feel like you're a big fucking lumbering 200-foot tall fucking giant monster trudging through fucking Tokyo. And like I can see that kind of turning people off, but I think it's great. Because you want that. You want to feel like you're fucking Godzilla. And if you watch the movies, that's how Godzilla moves. He's not some quick fucking dude. Well, there's been moments. And that's another cool thing about the game is like it pays tribute to the whole like Godzilla legacy. You know, everything from like the old Showa 70s movies that were fucking goofy, that were silly. Like there's like three moves in the game that are intentionally calling back to those movies, to the silly moments. Like there's a move in the game where like Godzilla does that thing where he's like, wah, 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 wah. You know, if you've probably seen a GIF or video of him doing that somewhere. There's one where like he shoots atomic breath and flies backwards with his tail, like I am become death, destroyer of worlds. That's that image of him like flying on his tail with his feet out in the fucking Jet Jaguar movie was fucking great. With that caption, "I am become death, destroyer of world," that cracks me up every fucking time. Like the fact Jet Jaguar is in this game at all, like really is a testament to the fact that they're kind of embracing that silliness, that goofiness to Godzilla, and like there's a lot of music cues too. Like there's dun 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 dun, like that music whenever the military shows up. It's really kind of funny and goofy, but at the same time, like it's also like when you get down to it, the original fucking Gojira, the original Godzilla movie was a it wasn't a comedy. It was a fucking tragedy. It was a tragic movie. It was like a disaster movie, but where the disaster was Godzilla and not like a tsunami or anything like that. Like this, like what would happen if a giant fucking radioactive lizard just stomped through Tokyo and just laid waste? It wouldn't be a fun time. Like you wouldn't be cracking jokes. It would be fucked up. Like, imagine if that fucking happened. Like, it would be devastating. It'd be a national tragedy, unlike anything the world's ever seen. Like, you'd almost hope in my infinite naivete that people would kind of like the world would kind of pull together. You know, like in Watchmen, Ozymandias' whole plan is to like unite the world stage with a common enemy that is not of this earth. Like that was the plot of Pacific Rim. Like a fucking giant monster shows up and just destroys an entire city, and the whole planet kind of bounds around. Like, okay, like I know, like we don't gotta get along. We just gotta like put that shit aside and focus on what's important here. And the important thing is holy fucking shit, giant monsters. And there's like that's in the game. Where like when you're trudging through and you're like stomping on tanks and shooting fucking helicopters out of the air, you hear like the screams of the pilots as they crash and die in horrible agony in your ear. And like the main the like really the main characters of the game are like the G-Force like operator kind of leader person and the prime ministers. And as the game goes on, they just start losing their fucking shit. They're just like, "Oh my fucking god, Godzilla's just gonna kill everything." And it's not a good time, you guys. It's not a good fucking time. And like the voice acting isn't anything to write fucking home about, but like they do a pretty good job, I think. Like there's a few times where like one of the prime ministers is like they don't literally do that, but like you can like they get across what they need to in their performance. And there's no like actual human character models in the game. It's just tanks, helicopters, jets, and that's it. Like the only humans you see are in those like fucking like still images right here with their face and then the subtitles under it, and that's all you see. They're not actually in the game. So like it's still like E10, I would say, probably T. I don't know what the actual rating is, but I would still say like E10, maybe T. Like, you don't actually see anyone die, but it's still pretty fucked up. It's still pretty disturbing. Especially when, like, you hear, like, the fucking, ah, no, I'm dying, help me, screams, while the fucking da 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 music is playing. And I'm like, this is a little, there's a little juxtaposition here that I don't think was entirely intentional. And that's not even getting into the fucking monster fights when a fucking another kaiju comes down and you fucking fight with them. Like that it's so great. Like it's fucking it's really fun. Yeah, like Kitty, shut up. I'll beat you up. You almost wish like because it's not like fighting game complexity or depth or systems. Like there's not like combo lists or a wealth of things you can do. It's just the same moves you use while destroying a city with the other monsters. So like you kind of wish like those destroy all monster like the destroy all monsters melee games. Those were fighting games first. And like you can destroy a city that you're fighting in the process. But like this game is a like rampage, city destruction, Godzilla simulator first, and then you fight monsters. Which like that's almost ingenious because the original Gojira movie was like fucking Godzilla's just trudging through being a national disaster, and then like him fighting other giant monsters came later. So like that's almost it's so brilliant it had to have been unintentional. Where like it's designed as a you're Godzilla, you're destroying the city first. And then like you also fight giant monsters. And like I just thought of that off the top of my head now, and now I really want to think about that. But yeah, it's super fucking fun. Like it puts you back in the mindset of like when you're watching the Power Rangers as a kid and they get in the Megazord and the oh yeah, you get it, you get that shit. Where like they're in the Megazord and they're fighting the monsters and like they're just throwing each other around and destroying buildings. Like that moment where you fucking knock a guy on his ass and like send him flying and he crashes through like 3 buildings behind him and it just gets blown up in this glorious spectacle. Like that's the moment where you're kind of like, okay, I'm fucking in now. I'm in it. Like toss a motherfucker into a Ferris wheel. That shit's great. It's super great. This game's fun. And like right now I'm playing as like I showed a little bit of it in the stream where I played as like Legend Goji from the 2014 movie Hollywood Godzilla. Like we kind of need to consolidate a nickname for this guy. I prefer Legend Goji because the guys who made that movie were called Legendary Pictures, so Legend Goji. So playing as him is really fucking trippy because like I showed off a little bit of that where he's like fucking massive and huge. He again, it's so smart. It had to have been unintentional. Where playing as him and like trying to destroy the city is kind of difficult and aggravating. But playing as him and fighting other monsters is like, oh my god, like he fucking rips these motherfuckers a new asshole. Like it's rare the monster you fight as Legend Goji who he doesn't just completely fucking demolish. Even the 100-meter tall, like, special event encounter ones that are like, you're not supposed to win, kind of. Even those ones, like, don't really, like, barely put you on the ropes. And, like, that's pretty smart. Because in the fucking in the Legendary Pictures movie, uh, Godzilla isn't like a force of destruction like he's sometimes portrayed as. He's just he his purpose in the film is to fight the other monsters. It could not have been intentional, that design, but it's just really funny to me how like it's evoking the film that it's based on. Like this game is so good at playing tribute to Godzilla. It's doing it without even on purpose. It's not even doing it on purpose. Some of the things it's doing, like, ooh, it's fun. It's probably like the first real Godzilla game we've ever had. When you think about it, when you really think about it, like the Destroy All Monsters melee games are fun, but they were fighting games. Like, and that's good. They were good for what they were, and they were fun. But like, this is the Godzilla experience. Like, this is finally a game where you're like, yeah, I'm fucking Godzilla. Like, this is a Godzilla game. It's super cool. And that just like it's been putting me in like kind of a mood, like it's pumping me up. It's kind of like putting me in that Godzilla mindset where now I want to watch all the movies and shit, and like watch a whole bunch of Angry Video Game like Cinemassacre Godzilla-thon videos about it. I just want to immerse myself in Godzilla shit because that's how I am. Like I get in a mood and I'll just be like must absorb everything. And it's been making me think about like Godzilla like in general, and it's really great that this is all happening like right now. Because when you think about it, like this is the time to be a Godzilla fan, to be a giant monster fan in general. This shit's like coming back in a big way, and it's really great. Like it started with Cloverfield, and that was kind of like the appetizer. And that was an interesting spin on the genre, where it was like a found footage movie, which I hate, but like it was filmed like a national like if you took like there was a new movie, a recent movie that was like a found footage movie where it's a tornado and people are like dealing with a tornado is happening, and it's a found footage movie like that. It's that, but instead of like a tsunami or a hurricane or an earthquake, it's a giant monster, and that's a really good spin on that formula, where it's strictly from the POV of the people trying to survive the monster attack, and like for what it was, pretty solid movie. And like pretty like again like a good like take on the giant monster attack genre of movies, like the kaiju fucking thing. But like it didn't really catch fire the way you might have hoped. Like the movie that really like lit the spark up was Pacific Rim. Like however you feel about that, and like unfortunately it didn't perform extravagantly well at the box office because it hit theaters the same day fucking Grown Ups 2 did. So like, what's the lowest common denominator of the average movie going public gonna go see? Is it the new Adam Sandler movie? It's a sequel. Look, it's Grown Ups 2. And it's Adam Sandler. I know who that is. I know the Adam Sandler. I'm gonna go see that movie. What's this Pacific? I never heard of no Pacific Rim job. What is that? Is that a pornography? I don't know what the fuck this like fucking anime bullshit Neon Genesis Evangelion. Like, what? I don't want to be evangelicized when I'm watching my cartoons. Why is this cartoon? Why is this kid masturbating on the comatose body of his older sister, mom figure, whoever? That's a weird experience. I'm trying to watch for cartoons here. Like, no real big surprise that that movie didn't, set the fucking box office on fire. And, like, they had to have realized that. They had to have realized that, that's. When you make a movie like that, you have to know that you're like, okay, we're going for a niche audience here. This is not going to be a mainstream success kind of a movie. You have to kind of know that going in. And I hope they would. I hope they would know that going in. I hope they would go like, okay, obviously this was not a blow up the world success. We didn't expect it to be. You can make another one. Like, I want more Pacific Rim movies. It would be really disappointing if, like, that would be the end of it. But, like, in terms of, like, the popular interest for kaiju films, like, that really kind of, like, lit the fire under the pot again. And like, I guess it was just good luck that the Legendary Pictures Godzilla movie was coming out very, very shortly thereafter. They had to have been setting that up because it was both Legendary Pictures. And, like, the Godzilla 2014 movie really just blew the fuck up. It made a lot of money, especially, like, worldwide. Like, that really reinvigorated the brand. Like, specifically the Godzilla brand. And it's really... It did so good, I wish that Toho would capitalize on it. Like, because they're gonna start making new Godzilla movies, but I wish that they would just make a fucking box set of all the Godzilla movies, because that doesn't fucking exist. The closest one is the Godzilla collection, which I have. And it's only got, like, 10 movies, maximum. And it's like, there's been, like, 50 Godzilla movies. Bundle it up. Put all the fucking Godzilla movies in a box set and just give it. Charge $100. I don't care. I want every single Godzilla movie. Anyway, that's like, unfortunately, that's just not the reality we live in right now. But, like, regardless, it has been making me, like, putting me back in that Godzilla mood, and it's been making me think about Godzilla, and, like, when you think about Godzilla, and, like, it's not helped by the fact this game has an encyclopedia of, like, all the kaiju monsters in the series, this series has a little bit of an impenetrable lore going on. Like, when you read about how King Ghidorah is, like, a space dragon who was worshipped on Venus by the Venetians, and then he landed on Earth in a meteor, and, like, you're kind of like, okay. Like, you try and explain this shit to the layman, and after a certain point, when you kind of say it out loud, you're like, wow, this shit is dumb and goofy, but it's the best kind of dumb and goofy. It's the fucking Japanese kind of dumb and goofy. But, like, even, like, and that's just, like, enemy, like the Rogues Gallery kaiju. Like, even just explaining Godzilla is a little bit of a feat, because, like, which Godzilla are you talking about? Because believe it or not, there's been like 5 different Godzillas. And, like, not even in terms of, like, our perception, like, in universe, there's been different Godzillas in the movies. Where, like, because, like, it all started with the original film, which was Godzilla, or Gojira. And I say Gojira to differentiate it. Because, like, if you, like, chart these movies, like, there hasn't been a single movie just called Godzilla. Like, even the original movie that was dubbed in English was called Godzilla King of the Monsters. So, like, people who complain that the new movies are reboot, like, oh, it's just Godzilla, where do I put that in my collection of the movies? Like, A, you don't have a collection of the movies. Your filing system is not in danger here. And B, Gojira, Godzilla King of the Monsters. There has not been a Godzilla period movie before that. So like Gojira, like the original one, the original Godzilla, and like that's another cool thing is Godzilla gets interpreted differently throughout the ages. Like in the original movie, like obviously he was a metaphor for the nuclear bomb. And like I could go into that, but I'm gonna go into something else later. And like what a lot of people might not realize, like casual observers might not realize, is at the end of Gojira, fucking Godzilla dies. They kill him. They fucking use the oxygen destroyer and fucking kill Godzilla. And he's fucking dead. So every Godzilla after that original film is a new Godzilla. Is a different Godzilla. And they touch on that in this game actually, where they're like, is this the same Godzilla? What the fuck? And there's always been like different explanations for it. Like in the movies after Gojira, like starting with like Godzilla Raids Again, I think was the first one. Either Godzilla Raids Again or Godzilla vs. King Kong. They just kind of say like, oh, it's another Godzilla. It's just another member of the species Godzilla. Because that was back in the day when they were like, it's dinosaurs who were brought back by nuclear radiation or something. That's always been weird to me. I've never liked thinking of Godzilla as like a dinosaur, you know, like he's a Reptar or something. Reptar's cool. Reptar. We need a Reptar game. We need a Reptar skin for Godzilla in this game. Anyway, so like, it's just been like, oh, that's the second. There was a second Godzilla. Which, what do you think about? Like, that's terrifying. But of course, in those original films in the 70s, Godzilla got turned into a hero character. He was a good guy. He was like a friend of the children, and he saved the day and stuff like that. And that was the era like where a lot of the goofy shit is from. A lot of the goofy 70s shit. But like, if you go back and watch them, those are really good movies. But like, in a mystery science theater-y kind of way, like there's some that are better than others, and there's some where it's like Jet Jaga. Like there's some where you're kind of like, okay, even for the time, people knew what this was. Like this isn't something where you're like, oh, you just need to have a historical appreciation for the context of the era that it was made. Like, no, even at the time, even Japanese audiences seeing this in the theater were like, this is a fucking B movie. Which is kind of like, after a while, they kind of stopped making the movies. And, like, they took a break. You know, they kind of said, like, okay, let's put the pin on that Godzilla shit for a little bit. And kind of take a back seat here. Because, like, really, the movies had only gotten to that point in the first place because of kind of the environment around it. Like, Godzilla was never intended to be, at the time, what it had become known as in the popular conscious. Like the Godzilla fighting monsters movies only kind of became that way because of the other, like, giant monsters of that genre. Like, it really was a genre in Japan at the time, where, like, you had Rodan and Mothra. And Mothra had her own series. Like, she had her whole own TV show where she was, like a protector of Earth. And that's kind of why Godzilla ended up becoming a good guy after a while, because it was a business move. They were like, you know, this Mothra shit's really popular that we got. And Gamera in that same vein. But that's not Toho. I believe that's a different company. Gamera's back too, by the way. That's another reason I say, like, oh, this is a good time to be a giant monster fan, because Gamera 2 is also back. I haven't seen any of it, though. I kind of want to. Anyway, where they're like, well, like, he'll be more marketable as, like, a kid-friendly kind kind of character because that first movie not kid friendly. Uh, all the Showa films afterwards a little bit more all ages acceptable. But after a while, even at the time, people knew shit was getting goofy, so they were like, okay, let's put a cap on that. And then like later on, they rebooted the series in the 80s, in 84. So like whenever you hear people whine about how reboots are this new thing, just remind them Godzilla rebooted 3 fucking times before this new one, where people are like, oh, it's a reboot. Godzilla was rebooting before it was cool back in the 80s, motherfucker. With like Godzilla, I think it was Godzilla Returns. In America, it was just Godzilla 1985. And I forget specifically what the explanation was in that movie. In fact, I'm gonna be real lame. Fact checking will ruin this podcast. I'm actually gonna look here. Oh, I didn't actually get the right one. But yeah, like, Return of Godzilla was the first reboot, and like, it reset the continuity where it was like watch Gojira, then watch Return of Godzilla. That is the order. Like, Gojira happened, and then Return of Godzilla happened. And like, though that era of films was like the 80s films were very different from the Showa films. The Heisei Japanese word. Heisei films, something like that, were very different. Like, they brought back a lot of the darker aspects of Godzilla. They brought back a lot of the like, hey, motherfuckers, he's not a good guy. He's just a giant monster. Like, he fights other giant monsters, and those giant monsters are bad, but he's still a giant monster. It's not a good time. In those movies, you watch them now, and I would say they still hold up reasonably well. Like, in their own context, too. Like, you still have that goofy shit. You still have, like, telepathic children and science where some guy takes cells from Godzilla and fuses them with a rose and creates a giant tentacle monster, and there's still and like fucking oxygen destroyer parasites are running around. It's still pretty dumb. It's still pretty silly. There's still like time travel and weird science and shit. But it's a lot more acceptable at face value than the Showa films were. Like, you can kind of suspend your disbelief and go along with it. Especially that last movie, Godzilla vs. Desidraya, was fucked up. Like, the first half of that movie is basically an Aliens film. Or, like, if the aliens invaded planet Earth. Or, like, XCOM with the fucking, chrysalids. That's like, you watch that shit now, like that, I'd still say Godzilla vs. Desidraya holds the fuck up on its own merits. And like, that era of Godzilla also had its own continuity, where like he had his own kind of relationships with other, with like characters in its continuity. Like, there was one character specifically who was like a telepathic little girl who Godzilla kind of had like a buddy relationship with. He had a little bit of like sympathy for his pet human telepathic girl, and like he had a kid in that continuity, which was kind of a callback to Minya, which was dumb. I'm glad they dropped that shit. Son of Godzilla is the worst fucking movie. Anyway, but and there was actually like consistent growth throughout the movies of that one too, and it culminated in fucking Godzilla vs. Destroya, which was the last film in that continuity. Where like you see it happen in this game, where Godzilla like gets old and gets all irradiated and orange and glowing, and he's basically a nuclear reactor, so he's gonna blow up and blow up the whole world and shit. And then Destroyer comes in, and he's gonna fuck up Godzilla, and they gotta fight. And then, like, in that movie, Godzilla Jr. steps up to the fucking plate and becomes a badass and helps in the fight with Destroyer. And then at the end of the movie, Godzilla dies. Spoiler. And, like, through magic radioactive pixie dust, like, he kinda passes on his abilities to Godzilla Jr., and he becomes the new Godzilla, and they beat out over Destroya. And like, it kind of ends on that kind of like, pass the torch moment, where, this, like, the sun sets on this era of Godzilla, but Godzilla, there will always be a Godzilla. Even though, like, again, they kind of took a break after that film. They kind of put the pin in it again. They were like, okay, we're done with Godzilla movies for a little while here. And then the Matthew Broderick movie happened. The Roland Emmerich Godzilla movie happened. And Toho was like, this will not stand, man. And they had to reboot, they had to make some new movies again to kind of be like, oh god. And they made some new Godzilla movies. And the interesting thing about the Millennium era of Godzilla was, like, each film in the Millennium era was kind of its own self-contained continuity. Like, you would, there were some times where Godzilla was, like, a personification of, like, all the dead spirits of the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki who were angry at modern day Japan for forgetting the pain of that they experienced being victims of nuclear bombs. And you watch that and you're like, that's fucking metal. Like, that's a fucking metal ass Godzilla right there. And then you have other films in the same series where it's like, Godzilla is the same Godzilla from the first movie, and he's back. Or like, you have some films where it's Godzilla Jr., and like, they really just took it as kind of an excuse to just do whatever. Like, it's kind of like the Batman animated features you have right now, where like you have Under the Red Hood, and you have Son of Batman, and you have like Justice League Doom, and like they're all kind of their own thing, and it gives the people making it a lot more creative freedom to just do whatever they want with the concept. Especially with Final Wars, which was this cool final send-off for the entire franchise, because that was the last movie they did for a long time, where they were kind of like, okay, we kind of like, for ourselves, we kind of like, redeemed Godzilla, and then in the eyes of our fans, after that fucking Matthew Broderick piece of shit. They even killed off Zilla. Like, they like, there's this, I'm sure you can find a clip of it somewhere, where they bring Zilla. Like, Toho hated that movie so much that they bought it. They bought the rights to it just so that they could bring Zilla from that movie into Final Wars and have real Godzilla fucking kill him in like 2 seconds. And there's this funny scene also in one movie where, like, they're having a meeting about Godzilla. That's another thing that's always been funny about the Godzilla, like, mythology, where like they have like a fucking task force devoted to Godzilla, and they have Godzilla drills to, like, oh, in case of Godzilla attack, fucking go to your local Godzilla shelter. And like, I love shit like that. I love shit where like Godzilla is just an accepted norm. For some reason that really amuses me. Anyway, where like two guys are sitting down and they're having a meeting about Godzilla, and one was like, wasn't there a Godzilla attack in New York or something like that? And the other guy's like, that's what the Americans say, but our experts here have doubts about that. Like, that wasn't really a Godzilla attack. That was just a kaiju. That was just some fucking giant monster That weren't no Godzilla. Where they're like people cannot piss on that movie enough. Even when people like try to be nice to that movie, or they're like, "Oh, it's a fine giant monster movie if you just ignore the it says Godzilla on the box." Like, fuck you. How about if it didn't want to be regarded as a Godzilla movie, it shouldn't have been called fucking Godzilla. How about if a fucking game says fucking Silent Hill Downpour? How about I'm gonna judge it by the fucking title that says fucking Silent Hill on it? You don't get to just run that back and say like, oh, it needs to be judged on its own merits. No, fuck you. You named it that. You gotta suck it up and accept the fact that there is a fucking 30-year legacy that goes with this name, that people are fans of, that has penetrated the popular consciousness for good and for bad, and you didn't fucking measure up. Don't fucking, like, sugarcoat this shit. Don't be like, oh, judge on its own merits. No, how about you make a good fucking movie? That's not acceptable. I don't accept excuses like that, okay? I don't accept, like, oh, just be nice to the poor little old movie. It didn't do nothing wrong. Fuck you, that movie sucked. Whew. Anyway. Anyway. Well, at the same time, I can't hate that movie too much because that's how I am. I just had this whole like fucking anyway. Because the animated series came from it. There was a cartoon based on like that was a follow up to the Matthew Broderick film with the same characters and everything, like the same like the main character in the animated series is the worm guy. That's a lot of fish. Like it's that character, and it follows him in his adventures with like the new Godzilla, and it was really good. It was a really good show, and Godzilla was pretty cool, and he fucking shot the fucking atomic breath, and really that's all I need to be happy. I'm pretty sure you can get that on DVD somewhere, the complete. Show. Sorry. But yeah. Like, the one good thing about that movie was its existence justified this cartoon. And that's it. And that's all I'll give it. But, you know, after Final Wars, they kind of put the pin in it again. They're like, okay, we're kind of done for now. But then it was 10 years later, and we're like, okay, hi, we're Hollywood. Can we make a new film? And they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then boom, Godzilla 2014. And that's a totally new, like, totally new. Like, that one isn't even a sequel to Gojira, really. Like, that, like, Godzilla 2014 completely stands on its own. Which I like, because you know, it's a different cultural take. And I love shit like that. Like, I love seeing Western anime. I love seeing Japanese westerns. Like, that's funny. That's great. I love that kind of like that's one of the reasons that Metal Gear Solid is one of my favorite game series of all time, because it's a Japanese made action, like Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie. It's a Japanese made James Bond movie. It's really great seeing different cultures reflected through that lens. You know, that lens of interpretation. And it's really great to see, like, a real American Godzilla movie. And it's really cool. I wish that they would make a Spanish Godzilla movie. But, like, it's good, too, that they kind of, like, they don't have the baggage to worry about. They can do their own thing, but they still pay tribute. And they pay respect. Like, there's Easter eggs in that movie that hint at Mothra and stuff. And those are just great, like, fan moments. Where, like, hey, you a fan of these Godzilla movies? That's for you, because we're fans too. That's why we're making the movie. And like, there's a lot of, like, subtext to that film too that I like on a more, like, kind of base level, where like the enemy creatures in that film were the Mutos, and were they evoked the design of, the Cloverfield monster, and I feel like that's intentional. A lot of people say that as a criticism, like, oh, this is a boring monster design. I think that was intentional. I think they did that on purpose, because they were like, this is, you know, American monsters. Like, these are our giant monsters. We're gonna have them fight Godzilla. Godzilla wins. Godzilla's better than, the Cloverfield design of giant monsters that we usually come up with. Like, he's the fucking king of all monsters right here. And now that we're allowed to make these movies, we're gonna fucking, burn that bridge, burn the Cloverfield bridge. And, do our spin on those designs and those concepts. And I really like it. And then like you go a little bit deeper into like what Godzilla represents in that movie. And that's the shit that just makes my dick rock hard, because like I've said, like Godzilla can be reinterpreted in a million different ways. Like I just said, one time he was the fucking personification of the dead souls of the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for fuck's sake. Like, he isn't always a metaphor for the bomb. Like, that's not his... Sorry, cat drama. Anyway. Or like, Godzilla isn't just one thing, he's kind of like, there's this, college humor video, or it's like, Nerdler, I think was the show, where they're talking about, where they have this guest on, and they're talking about, the Star Wars movies, where he was like, Star Wars is what it is. Like, you can't really reinterpret that. Like, it is a very specific kind of thing. And if it's not that thing, it's not Star Wars. And his comparison was like, Batman gets reinterpreted throughout the ages. Like, he can be this goofy Adam West guy, he can be dark and gritty, he can be something in between. Like, Batman is whatever we need him to be. And that's what Godzilla is. Godzilla is whatever we need him to be. He changes with the times. Like, when he was invented, Japan was to this date, the victim of a nuclear attack. They knew what the bomb represented in a very personal way, and they were recovering from both that, attack, and from, the aftermath of being like a vanquished enemy in a war. And they had to deal with an occupation from a foreign power, and they were very concerned with their public perception. Because, like, that'll fuck a country up, right? Like, being seen the way they were seen at the time, in addition to what they had kind of gone through, that no other country on the planet knows what they'd gone through. And even today, like, people living in Japan today, they're living in the after effects that have grown from that. But like, even today, like, that generation who lived through the napalm carpet bombings and Imperial Japan and the H bombs being dropped and American occupation, like, we're never really gonna know. Like, that was a wholly unique experience, like, all together right there. And Godzilla was kind of an outgrowth of that and a lot of other things, in terms of like personal experiences on the part of the people who were involved with making the movie. But like, you can't just do that over and over again, both because, like, it's not relevant anymore, culturally speaking, and historically speaking, and societally speaking. Like, Japan today, Japan in the 80s, was not what Japan was in the 1950s. It was not a vanquished enemy victim of the atomic bomb. It was something very different. Like, even in the 80s, Japan was, like, getting on its feet and putting its foot in the world stage and, like, kind of becoming an economic force in the world. And now today, Japan is this, like it's out there. It's got massive clout. And it's not, I wouldn't, like, you wouldn't say it's a superpower like the way America or even Russia is starting to get back there. Russia's starting to get back there, and that's freaking a lot of people out. But like in its own right, it's a trade force. It's an economic force to be reckoned with. Or China also is kind of a world power. Anyway, so like you couldn't do Godzilla as the bomb again because the world we live in wouldn't make sense for a Godzilla of that nature anymore. So, like, of course you have to reinterpret him. Even the Toho movies reinterpret him. They reinterpret him as a fucking children's hero, for crying out loud. Like, you can do it a lot of ways. So when you make an American Godzilla, obviously the interpretation is going to be different. Obviously, it's not going to be a representation of the bomb. And it's not disrespectful to do that. It makes sense to interpret it differently because our views of, Godzilla, of giant monsters, of that whole like fantasy is very different culturally speaking compared to Japan. So it'd have to be different. And seeing people complain about that, like, oh, you're changing Godzilla to be something, this other thing. That's disrespectful and racist. Hollywood is and stupid. I don't have a lot of respect for those people who say shit like that because they're dumb and narrow-minded and dumb. Anyway, I really like Godzilla 2014 as a movie, and I really like it as an interpretation of Godzilla because in Godzilla 2014, in Legendary Godzilla, Godzilla is kinda has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. Like there's tenuous connections to where they're like, they dropped bombs on Godzilla to try and kill him. It didn't work. But, like, as a creature, he doesn't have any relation to the nuclear bomb. He's just this ancient creature. Where, like, he's this prehistoric animal who existed in time before time. And he's a super ancient apex predator. And he at the time, and obviously today, he was top of the food chain. And we kind of like, and he lay dormant because, they were radioactive creatures because the planet's surface back in the day was way radioactive. But, like, over time, that shit dissipated and allowed for, life to form. And blah, 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 movie logic. But, like, the whole nuclear arms race kind of woke them up because, like, we were starting to harness nuclear power, radioactive power as a weapon and as an energy source. And that usage kind of woke up these creatures again. And Godzilla woke up to these monsters waking up because, like, hey, meat's back on the menu. But, like, in terms of, like, that's just the lore of the new movie. But, like, in terms of how he's portrayed, in terms of his place as a metaphorical figure in that film. It's very different. I would like he's sort of represented as like the balance of nature. You know, like there's even a line in the film where Ken Watanabe, who's great, he's a great guy, where he's like, you know, the arrogance of man is the belief that we are in control of the natural order of the planet and not the other way around. And that's what Godzilla very like that's not even subtext at that point where like that's what Godzilla represents. He represents like the indifference that the planet has to humanity's existence. Because like and I think that's a very relevant message to have in this day and age where everyone's kind of environmentally conscious and there's all this pollution and there's extreme environmentalists and our carbon footprint and all that stuff. And like it's very relevant to kind of remind people that like we're not fucking with the planet. You know, the planet's fine. The planet doesn't give a shit. We're destroying our own environment. We're destroying our habitat and we're making things unlivable for ourselves. And we're kind of fucking up other species that we interact with, obviously. But like it is the arrogance of man to believe that we sit atop this natural order, that we aren't a part of it, that it exists at our behest and not the other way around. That's not how it is. You know, like the planet don't give a fuck. Like eventually we're gonna go extinct, and when that happens, the planet is gonna keep fucking spinning. And in the cosmic scale, in terms of that, it's not our brief existence isn't really gonna make that much of an impact. Like when you pull the scope back a little bit, like what has the planet endured? Like there's this great George Carlin skit where he really breaks down all this shit like sunspots and volcanic eruptions and like a fucking like people think that the moon is just a part of the Earth that got split off when an asteroid is like a fucking whole fifth of the Earth just got fucking crunch became a moon. Like all this shit fucking happens and oh pollution's going to destroy the planet. No. It sounds fucking silly. Like, even if you want to say, like, we're melting the ice caps, and, like, oh, that shit's gonna flood the planet, and we're all gonna die. Like, it's not gonna take the planet Earth very long to bounce back. Even if you want to argue that there was anything to bounce back from in the first place. Like, after the last human being on this planet is dead and, you know, skeletonized, it's gonna take the planet Earth, like, 1,000 years, maybe, to completely wipe away all traces of our existence. Like, 1,000 years after the last human being drew their last, from a casual glance, you would not be able to tell we existed at all in the first place. There would be no evidence, just from a surface analysis, that we were here at all. Everything we built would be ash and dust. Every mark we had left would be, you know, kind of paved over. It's not going to matter. We don't matter. It doesn't matter. Because when you look at nature, like, there is kind of a natural balance to it. You know, like say there's an ecosystem, and there's 10 prey for every predator. And that has a very specific, you know, kind of give and take to it. Where, like, the predators sustain themselves because there's so much prey that And then there's the predators keep the prey from overpopulating and using up all the resort resources in that ecosystem. So there is that balance, uh, but like it's not always perfect either, and that's not to imply that there's like kind of a guiding hand of fate or whatever to it, like Mother Nature isn't like putting the pieces together. That's just the way things tend to turn out. Like there will be a natural equilibrium given a long enough span of time. Like there might like animals might migrate to a new area, there might become too many predators and they'll just like eat way too many prey, a new species might show up and throw the balance off. Like it's not stable. I'm not saying it's stable and static and there's a guiding order to it, but there is kind of a method to the madness that is nature. Like there's always an ebb and flow. It's like with the tides. The tides go in, the tides recede. The tides come in, the tides recede. Always. Like sometimes it floods. Sometimes there's a drought. But at the end of the day, the tide comes in, the tide recedes. And, like I said, given enough time, everything kind of evens itself out. And that's what, like, we don't realize. Like, obviously we affect the environment in the way we interact with it, but, like, there is such an arrogance to it, to our view of ourselves and our relationship with the planet and its and our fellow inhabitants of it. And that's what Godzilla represents in this movie to me. Like he is that indifference of nature. He is the personification of that natural order of things. And that's why it's so that's why he's not like some rampaging monster like he was in the original Gojira. Like he's not, I would hazard to say he's a good guy, but like he fights the other monsters that show up because they are in imbalance to the natural ebb and flow. Like it's a drought and Godzilla is the rain in that way. And he's totally apathetic to our existence because we, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of this ecosystem between these giant monsters, don't matter. Like we weaponized radiation and they're coming home to feed, but in the grand scheme of things, we don't matter. And there's great shots in that movie that kind of represent that. Like there's my favorite shot in that movie is like Godzilla's like swimming along, following after the Mutos, and like aircraft carriers are following him. And there was this great like bird's eye view shot of the aircraft carriers in the ocean, and like on either side, and Godzilla's like spikes are sticking out in the middle, and like you can see him swimming along, and like he just doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a fuck. Like they're just following along, and he's like, well, I don't know, like what are these ants? I don't even notice. Who fucking cares, right? It's fucking great, and like at worst, the American military is like an inconvenience to him. And there's other ways that theme gets across at other parts of the movie too. Like at the beginning with Bryan Cranston when they go back into the area of the prefecture of like the little city that got evacuated and quarantined after the nuclear plant accident that they're saying is bathed in radiation, but it really isn't. Like the city is getting overtaken by nature, and it's only been like 15, 20 years or something like that, and already like buildings are just, creaking and rusted and being overgrown with vines and vegetation, and there's wild animals like dogs running around and insects, and like they're flourishing. And like give it a couple hundred years, that shit would be rubble, and then a couple more hundred years after that, that shit's ash. That shit's nothing. It reminds me of Last of Us. Last of Us had that same thing where like 20 years on, nature always wins. Like you remove people from a city, that's not gonna be a city for very much longer anymore. It's gonna just be a jungle. Or depending on the location. But yeah, like that's what the theme of that movie feels like to me. And like the only time Godzilla like even acknowledges humanity is when like they're fucking shooting at him, like fucking missiles and shit. And it's kind of like, hey, stop it, stop. Like there's the scene at the bridge where like they're shooting missiles at him and shit, being dumbasses, and he's just like, fucking knock it off. Like really, that's what it feels like. It doesn't even bother him. The fucking mosquito bites. And then like outside of that, the only fucking time like he even acknowledges humanity exists really is near the very end, where like he killed one of the monsters and he kind of needs a breather. Like that's also a great thing about the movie is that it gives Godzilla a character. Like he has emotions. He has a character. It's really great. Where like he kills one of the monsters and it's kind of like, like fucking, god damn, I need a fucking power bar after that shit. God dang, phew. Like he's kind of worn out. He needs a breather, and it's so great. And like a building topples on me. He's like, oh well, that's all I need right now. And like he fucking falls down, and like he sees like the main character, Jason Brody, kick ass. Like he kind of catches eyes with him, and like eye contact is made. And it's just kind of like, what's up, bro? Like what? Like a lion looking upon a mouse. Like whatever. It was great. It was fucking funny, and it was actually a pretty powerful moment too. In context, and it's kind of a reminder that like nature is indifferent to us, but like we're a part of it. We interact with nature. We are a part of that natural order as well. Like it's so easy to feel like there's nature and humanity, but that's not really how it is. We are natural creatures, obviously, and everything we do is natural, and we're part of that. And like even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes, even if we delude ourselves into thinking we're not, even if we kind of it feels like we're kind of taking a little bit more than it makes sense to, with the kind of equilibrium of the ecosystem at the time. Like we're still a part of that system. We're still a part of nature, and that's what that little that kind of glance was about. Like because at that moment in the film, they were kind of helping each other out unintentionally, because like the Marines were going in or whatever to get the nuclear bomb that the monsters had built their nest out of, and to try and get that bomb out of there so it doesn't blow up the fucking city. And the only reason the mama monster wasn't there and would have fucked them up and stopped them from being able to do that is because Godzilla was fighting with them. Like the mom was there doing the thing, looking over the nest, and they were like, well fuck, what are we gonna do? And Godzilla's like, fucking fight me, bitch. And then they fought, and that gave them their opening to get in there. And then like Godzilla's getting gangbanged, double teamed by the two monsters, and Jason Brody, fucking kick ass, was like, I'm not just gonna leave this little fucking nest here because it's a nest with fucking eggs and shit. So he's like, I'm gonna blow this shit up, and he does, and that distracts the mom monster long enough for Godzilla to kind of like get a chance to like fucking shuffle things off and get back in the fight, and that's ultimately what makes the difference. So like the city was only saved from the nuke because Godzilla was fighting the monsters, and Godzilla only beat the monsters because Jason Brody fucking blew up the nest. So like, see, like that, it's all part of that fucking like, we do interact, we do have that place, and we do help it along, and it helps us along, and you know, it's all fucking great. It's all this big it's like poetry. It rhymes. It was a great movie. It was a great movie, and it's exciting because like now Toho is like, we gotta do our movies again, and at the same time, fucking Legendary Pictures is gonna do sequels to this one. Like in like 2018, I think they said there's gonna be a sequel to Godzilla, and that's like awesome in terms of as a Godzilla fan, and like just from like to look at that, like Toho and Legendary are both gonna be making Godzilla movies at the same time as each other. That's incredible. Like, can you think of another example of something like that that's happened? I wish it was. Like, it'd be so cool if, like, for example, like the new Tomb Raider game is coming out that's a sequel to the reboot. It'd be cool if they also made sequels to the original continuity as well, and have them, you know, both in tandem, both existing. That's really awesome. It's so cool. And now this fucking game, like Godzilla's back in such a big way. Like that pop cultural osmosis of like, you know, fucking like the jokes about the lip syncing, right? Yeah, yes, indeed. With the bad dubbing effects, and like people running, like Japanese people running from a giant monster and fucking Reptar. Like, we have had Godzilla in our popular consciousness for so long, but we really haven't had Godzilla for like 10 years. Even longer, if you want to really argue it, and I would. But like, it's so cool that he's back, and like I can't wait to see what the result of it. Like, imagine like, because our pop cultural osmosis of Godzilla is like, was like 20 years on from when those movies had been made. Like during the 70s, when those goofy B movies were being made, our jokes about them didn't come up until like 20 years later from Mystery Science Theater and shit. From that like kind of exposure to it. Imagine what the pop cultural idea of Godzilla is gonna be in 2030, in 2040. That's the shit that tickles my imagination, especially in this age of the internet. But yeah, great game.